Hello, everyone. Hi again. How do you do? My name is Adrian Montano. I'm a trainer and excellence coach at Mindgrasp, and welcome once again to one of our live videos where we continue to explore the very vast and really interesting subject of values and how exactly do we go through, how do we evolve through value levels, and what it entails, what it means for our day to day existence. Yesterday we began this new series of talks on values, and we started to explore what exactly values are. And I'll just do a very quick recap of the three main points that we made in yesterday's talk. So these would be, well, everybody has values because values are simply what is important to one. The other important point is that there are no good or bad values. There are, however, different values, and they can be suited or not to the environment and to the goals of a certain person or a certain group of persons. And finally, the fact that we all have values and that they are grouped around certain themes depending on which stage of your personal evolution you are compared to your environment. And that opens up today's talk because today we're going to look at what exactly makes values, what are the key factors that influence one person's values. And there are three main factors that make all the difference when it comes to a specific person's values. These would be the words that they use to describe the values themselves, then the neurology of that person. And here I don't just mean how smart they are. Actually, this is a big point that I would like to make today. What your values are and where you are on the scale of evolution of values has nothing to do with your IQ or any other type of measurable intelligence, how smart you are, how clever you are, how quick-witted you are. In fact, when we talk about neurology, we refer to the complexity of a person's learned behaviors. So the neural connections that influence and that are a mark of how that person naturally behaves in their environment and what behaviors they've learned so much that they just come naturally to them. So that would be the second factor. And the third, which is also really important, is the environment. So the environment in which they live and how it influences them. Now, these three aspects, the words that a person uses to describe what's important for them, their neurology, and the environment are all very strongly interconnected. And in fact, you cannot separate the three because a person might have the neurology, they might have the behavioral basis for acting and valuing certain things in a certain way, but if their environment is not complex enough, it won't allow them to start manifesting those values congruently and coherently and also genuinely, ultimately. So this brings me to another really important point, which I began hinting at in our talk yesterday, namely the fact that values are simply an adaptive response to growing, to developing in a certain environment. So we start valuing, we start considering certain things important based on the challenges that our environment brings to us. And this actually takes me to consider, well, how exactly do values hierarchies work, and how do the values levels succeed each other? It's a really interesting topic simply because just like the biological evolution of human beings is encapsulated in the evolution of the embryo in the womb. So the embryo in the womb goes through all the evolutionary stages that humans have gone through, and in fact all species on Earth have gone throughout the the history of evolution of species, so do the value levels mirror and encapsulate the evolution of human civilization. So the evolution of complexity of different stages in the growth of human societies on Earth. And one thing that Clare Graves discovered in his writings, and in fact that's the reason why there is no end to the evolution of values and going through value levels. There is no end to the evolution of complexity in human thinking and behavior, because human history and the evolution of human society is pretty much open-ended. There is no terminus point that it's headed towards, in spite of what certain types of memes, certain types of philosophical ideas very popular in society would claim. But we'll get to that in due time. So when we hear this term evolution through values levels, people might start thinking about, well, okay, this is a good value level, this is a not so good value level, this is superior, this is inferior. We're not talking about that. The only question is, well, are someone's values allowing them to adapt and to survive and thrive, even more so, in the environment that they're inhabiting, or not? Are their values well suited to excellent behaviors in a certain environment or not? And once you understand that, it allows you to begin to think about where you want to take your evolution, your personal evolution next, and how exactly you can begin influencing the complexity of the environment around you, as well as maybe considering moving to a more complex environment that can support your evolution and can support your manifesting more complex values. So without further ado, let's get to it. The first value level, which reflects, well, the very beginnings of our species, is something that the philosopher Giorgio Agamben called in one of his books bare life. So human life which is simply biological, it is in no way cultural. And in fact, value level 1 is very, very similar to pretty much all other animals' lives. It is purely instinctual life. It is life that is only geared towards biological survival. So the main drivers of this type of life are the fear that leads to fight, flight, and another key driver is, of course, needing to feed yourself, and sex only geared towards reproduction. So everything is purely instinctual, or essentially instinctual. It's life in its purest instinctual, animalic, one could say, form. And this value level is not that much encountered anymore throughout the world in its pure original form, unless we're talking about people who, for one reason or another, have regressed from more complex value levels to this type of bare life. Unfortunately, homeless people, for instance. But other than that, there are very few people in the world, or groups of people, who are left at this very basic level. Now, value level 2 represents the beginning of social life in human history, and in fact in the evolution of individual humans nowadays. So value level 2 is very much centered on the tribe, the family, kinship, everything centered around a group of individuals that are related by blood. Value level 2 is animistic, so it believes that behind all natural phenomena there are supernatural forces, and everything that happens within the family group is safe. So value level 2 is very much geared towards preserving the common bond, the common kinship of the tribe, of the extended family that it's connected towards. Everything that happens within the family is safe. Everything outside of it is very dangerous. And not just dangerous in a physical sense, but dangerous in a supernatural sense. It's a world full of mystery and a world from whence all sorts of hazards can pounce at any given second. And you can recognize this type of quasi-tribal thinking, which is really, really widespread around the world, and which individual humans go through in their very early childhoods as well. So value level 2 is, as I was saying, animistic. In this context, people also have misplaced causality. So, for instance, when a natural phenomenon happens, they attribute to it supernatural causes. For instance, the ancient Romans had a god of mildew. So when their harvests of barley were hit by mildew, they prayed to the god of mildew to spare them and their crops, and they sacrificed to this god in order to appease him. The god was called Rubigo. So, and this is by no means unique. There are value level 2 behaviors that we keep exhibiting in society. Like, for instance, whenever you're in trouble and you call your parents because of it, well, you're exhibiting value level 2 behavior. If you really value, if it's really important for you to go to meet your family over the holidays and have a big meal, and everybody gathers around the table and you enjoy that sort of fellowship, that's also something that derives from value level 2, because the core of that meeting is centered on family and the survival of kinship and the blood connection. Now, usually the value level 2 groups, because this is group-oriented thinking, have a head of the group, a chieftain, or the head of the tribe, a captain of some sort, who is either a patriarch or a matriarch, and they call all the shots. Whatever they say is the law of the land. Although the concept of law, as we will see, appears a bit later on. So, this, as I was saying, this type of thinking is very, very widespread around the world, and it dates back to the very beginnings of human social life. Now, value level 2 does not have the consciousness of self. Consciousness of self appears at the next stage, which is value level 3. And value level 3 is all about the individual. If value level 2 was centered on the family, well, value level 3 is all about the individual. It's about oneself. I'm strong, I'm powerful, the world is a jungle and I need to fight my way through it. Value level 3 does not think of consequences. And the historic origin of this type of thinking originates with, the historic origin lies with the first rising of warrior kingdoms in the history of mankind. So, for instance, in Eurasia, it's the rise of the Indo-Europeans, who conquered and destroyed the previous kingdoms that were all throughout Eastern, Central, Southern Europe. In Central and South America, it's with the rise of Incas and the Aztec civilizations. So, value level 3 thinking is very much individually focused, self-centered, but without taking into without taking into focus any consequences of one's own actions. It's all about satisfying your immediate pleasures here and now, without taking into account what other people might think or what their needs are. In fact, you can see the dark side of value level 3 behavior with people who just go out and commit heinous crimes. And then when they're asked, oh goodness, why have you done that? I mean, they get caught because obviously they weren't thinking of the consequences. And they're asked, okay, why did you do that? They said, well, I don't know, those people were just in the way of what I wanted to achieve. And if you're already recoiling a bit from that, I want to actually take the opportunity and mention something which is really important. Because as I was saying in one of my previous talks, perception is projection. And we cannot simply conceive, we cannot consciously be aware of anything in the outer world if it doesn't push our buttons in the inner world, if it doesn't mirror something which is inside. The descriptions of these value levels might really, really push your buttons, and they might trigger stuff coming up. And by stuff, I mean negative emotions or thoughts such as, oh, I'm definitely not like that, or I would never do that, I would never be like that. And that's okay, it's perfectly understandable. When I remember when I first learned about value levels at the NLP Master Practitioner course, I was quite taken aback about some of them and what exactly they entail. And what I learned and what helped me wrap my mind around it was that the more stuff comes up, the more of a sign it is from our unconscious mind that we might have unresolved issues around that specific aspect. Whether it's how we deal with our anger, whether it's how we deal with our guilt towards certain aspects, whether we're rejecting something because we're actually doing the very same pattern in another area of life, or whether it's because we are rejecting something because we're not allowing ourselves to do it. Maybe because deep down inside it's important for us to do it, but we're not allowing ourselves to do it. And with value level 3, a lot of the rejections come from people not being able to, not having found a good strategy for how they deal with anger, which ultimately boils down to how you defend your boundaries, how you stand up for yourself in the face of people who, knowingly or not, might trample over your physical or psychological, metaphysical boundaries. So ask yourself, okay, what exactly am I, what specifically am I bothered by? And where else in my life am I doing this? Or where am I not allowing myself to do this very same thing? And in our later talks, we'll begin discussing how we address these things. We'll look into what exactly do we do with it once we've become aware of it. But for now, I'll just come back to describing value levels and what exactly they're centered upon. Now, value level 3, as I was saying, is very much self-centered and is the first point in the evolution of mankind and also individuals when self-consciousness appears. People are aware that they are an individual separate from others. They're not aware of their consequences, and that's what opens the perspective of the further evolution on through value levels. Because when value level 3 messes up, when they go hot-headed into battle and destruction and short-sighted pursuit of pleasure, so much that, well, all hell boils over, what happens is that they realize they are frail and they are mortal, and in fact there is an end to their existence and they're not invincible. So that opens the perspective for value level 4. And historically, value level 4 started off at a very interesting time in human history, because it started off simultaneously all across Eurasia. In the 7th to the 6th centuries BC, what happened was that in Greece, philosophy started being born. In Babylonia, in the Jewish exile, the texts, the books that made up what nowadays we call the Old Testament of the Bible, so the books of the Hebrew Bible, were put together into a coherent whole. And in China, you have the writings of Lao Tzu and Confucius. And what reunites as a common theme of thinking all these texts is the aspect of a singular way, a singular path, which underlies all of reality. And you have this single path codified within a specific book that provides you with all the answers and that helps you come to terms with your mortality. So value level 4 is very much about that. Value level 4 is once again values level which is centered on the group, on how to appease a group of people who this time don't share the common kinship of blood, but rather the fact that they all subscribe to the writings of the same book, of the same text, which is risen to holy status, whether we're talking about a religion or we're actually talking about a system of thinking, because value level 4 thinking is not just common to the monotheistic religions, so Judaism, Christianity, Islam, but also to such religions, let's say, of thought, like Greek Stoicism, Epicureanism, and later on, well, much later on, in the evolution of mankind's totalitarian system, so communism on the one hand and fascism on the other. But the common thread is the idea that there is one book that has all the answers and prescribes all my actions. There is the common idea that I sacrifice myself now for the promise of a later reward, either in the case of religions in the afterlife, or in the case of totalitarian thinking, when the ultimate glorious project of society will finally be fulfilled. Value level 4 thinking is the type of thinking of the person who works in the same place for 35 years and then they look forward to retiring because they're going to get a gold watch and a diploma that is going to tell them what a good employee they've been, because they've stayed faithful to the same company and they sacrificed their personal life for the sake of a higher cause. And that is the running theme around the running thread through the thinking behind value level 4 and its behaviors. Value level 4 also cares a lot about order, about procedures, about laws. And if you're thinking, well, I would never do that. Well, if you're working in a corporation, you very likely are, because your existence as work is very strictly codified by specifically all the working procedures that you need to follow. And I've talked about negative sacrificial aspects of value level 4, but value level 4 has also left us with some very positive instruments, like the rule of law. The very idea of an impersonal legal system that you follow no matter what, the fact that all citizens are equal in front of the law, the doctrine of human rights and responsibilities is also very much value level 4. The idea of the behind the United Nations is also very much value level 4. The fact that we have rules for how we drive and how we go about walking in the cities, that also stems from value level 4 thinking. Now, one of the hindrances with value level 4 thinking is that it tends to get really, really dogmatic. If something isn't in the book, the holy book, whatever that one may be, whatever that text may be, then value level 4 simply discards it. And value level 4 is also really, really judgmental, and it's full of guilt. So at the same time, it's judging others for not conforming to the text of the law or the book, whatever that one may be, very, very narrowly. So it judges them and also feels very guilty for not living up to the, well, frankly, impossible standards prescribed rather than described from reality by that respective text. So this is the pendulum swing within value level 4 between judgment and guilt, with a lot of sacrifice and very narrow prescriptive thinking. Now, what happens when somebody gets fed up with guilt and with sacrificing themselves for the sake of some illusory ulterior reward? We'll begin looking at that tomorrow, because this is the opening of the next value level, which is 5. So coming back to the core of what we've discussed today, there are no good or bad values. They're just values which are more or less adapted or well suited to the environment in which somebody is living. And the words, the neurology, so the behaviors and the environment that facilitate a certain values level and a certain value hierarchy are all very intimately interconnected, interlinked, and they influence each other. And what is moreover than that, the evolution through value levels is possible, but it's not guaranteed. When I talked about human needs, I said, well, you have certainty, variation, connection, and self-importance, which are guaranteed. There are these four needs that one way or another we find how to fulfill for ourselves. But growth and contribution are not guaranteed. And contribution is where the evolution through growth is where the evolution through values levels sits. It's not a guaranteed human need, but when you do go about consciously moving towards it and embracing it, wonderful things start happening, because there is no greater rush of serotonin in our brains than when we form new neurological links, which only comes about by developing new behaviors and by learning to do new things. And this is what the evolution through value levels is all about. Thank you very much for listening today, and I look forward to finding you tomorrow when we start looking to the next values levels and bring us up to speed all the way to today with human history. So once again, thank you very much. I'm Adrian Montano, trainer and excellence coach at Mindgrasp, and I wish you a wonderful evening.